All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to episode number 259 of the Restoring Rapport podcast. We are super excited for the content we have planned out for you guys today. As always, this is a podcast for young believers who are pursuing the goal of marriage and family, trying to get married as young as possible in a healthy way. I'm your host, Seth Hensley. I come on twice a week, every week on Thursday and Sunday to discuss not only the importance of benefit of getting married young, but I try to equip and encourage you in your pursuit of that goal. And today we're going to be reviewing an article. It's actually a video called "The Problem with Short-Term Relationships." It's really an interview type video set up between Jordan Peterson and Brett Cooper that was recently published. I believe it was published on, let's see here, 3 weeks ago as of the day this is being recorded. This is being recorded on June the 15th. And so this is a video that I wanted to cover because short-term relationships are being presented as an alternative living situation to marriage, and people are acting like they're just as beneficial, and that marriage and short-term relationships are sort of two roads that you can take with similar consequences, which is totally not true. And today I'm going to be going over a few reasons why short-term relationships aren't the best idea. And obviously I'm going to be reviewing the problem that this video says is the problem with short-term relationships. So let's go ahead and dive right into it. But I do want to, on the note of these speakers, I have reviewed both of them in the past on the show. If you search Restoring Rapport followed by Brett Cooper or Jordan Peterson, all of the episodes that we have reviewed their content on will pop up. And so you can listen to them and consume them that way. But without further ado, let's go ahead and get started.
Let's talk about the most troublesome possible thing. So that would be women. So it's very frequently the case for me that if I say anything about how young women might conduct themselves so that their lives would turn out less than dreadfully, let's say, that's when I get the most caustic and vicious YouTube comments.
Is that real? No.
Absolutely.
It's the opposite for me.
Well, let's delve into that. Well, you're a female talking to females, and so that has something, because the comments that come my way are often variants of something like, what's this old white guy doing telling us what to do with our bodies? It's like,
well, I meant more in that when I talk about both genders, obviously, but when I talk about men and what I think they could do, that's when I get the most vitriol.
I see. Okay. So there's probably just a cross-sex thing going
I'm
here.
sure there.
Okay, so you're 23. You're married.
22.
22, sorry. Oh, I don't know why I thought you were 23. Now I'm making you older than you are. 22, you're married.
Yes.
You have a well-developed career.
Yes.
Okay, and I presume you're relatively pleased about both those things.
Very pleased.
Do you have plans for a family?
Yes.
How soon?
I would love it as soon as possible.
How are you going to manage it?
It's been a lot of what we've been working through right now. My mom is going to move to be near us.
Yeah.
Which I could not be more grateful for. And my husband truly turned his life upside down, turned his career upside down to make sure that he could be flexible for our family, so that he could balance when I am traveling or when he's traveling for work, then I can be at home. But he is running his own business now, which I think he had always wanted to do. And then when we started dating and got really serious, I think he realized, like, this is something I want to do for our family. I think it pushed him in that direction.
Okay, so what?
Okay, so just to kind of recap, we learned a lot in this past clip. Number one, Jordan Peterson is I think in his 60s. He's probably approaching 70. If I had to guess, you can fact check me on that if I'm wrong. And then we have Brett Cooper, who is she just said she was 22 and married, so that is 5 years below the national average age of first marriage for women. So she chose to get married young. A lot of people will say, well, that's okay for her because she has, as she said, a very solid career and she has the money to do so. And, we've addressed the financial arguments against getting married young in the past, so I'll let you go ahead and go back to listen to those. But I definitely think that getting married young is a good idea, and I wouldn't say that you have to be in a financial situation that Brett Cooper is here to get married. I'm by no means was myself, and I definitely don't regret getting married as young as I did. In fact, I would actually get married younger if the circumstances permitted that. And so, anyway, she's made the choice to get married young. doesn't regret it, and is very happy with the situation she kind of is in life. And that is already makes her kind of in the minority here, as far as most people would not think that's a good idea. And so she's probably gotten a lot of flack for that, I would say, from older people, yes. But really, it's not so much to do with age. It really has to do with the quality of the relationships people have who say that getting married young is a bad idea. And what I mean by that is usually people who would discourage people from getting married young don't have great relationships themselves, and so they're trying to steer other people clear of the shipwreck that they think marriage is, when in reality they just need to humble themselves and say, hey, maybe the problem with my current situation is not marriage itself, but rather my approach to it. Maybe I didn't actually do everything right, and that's why I ended up in the situation that I am in now. And so instead of encouraging people away from marriage, maybe I need to reflect on the choices that I made in my own marriage and see if all of those were of the highest quality. And so a lot of people, and something else I do want to highlight out is Jordan Peterson said that he got a lot of flack for giving young people, specifically young women, advice. And that, I would say, is due to the fact that for some reason we think it is impossible to receive advice from someone who is older than us if they are of the opposite sex, which I think is crazy. I mean, it would be stupid for us as Generation Z to turn down the advice and the wisdom of, the prior generation simply on the grounds that they're the opposite sex. People can give you a lot of value even if they're the opposite sex. People who are women who are about 40 years older than me can give me way more value than, let's say, a man who is my age. Absolutely. People who are, older than me can give me value no matter what their sex is, because they've been through more than I have. And so that's what makes their experience and life advice valuable. And I don't want to myself seem like someone who spurns the advice of prior generations when I say that getting married young is a good idea regardless of what other people say. I'm saying that I'm not saying you should turn down people's advice who say don't get married young because they're older than you and because they're wiser than you. I'm saying you should turn down advice from people who say that, because people who say that don't have great marriages, and you shouldn't ask people for directions who have never been where you're going. So if somebody doesn't have a good marriage, you don't need to take any marriage advice from them. Ignore everything they say, because you don't want to end up where that person is. Instead, what you need to do is look to somebody who is where you want to be and who has been where you want to be for many, many years and has lived there and is doing wonderfully, and you need to ask that person for advice. So I'm not saying turn down advice from previous generations altogether when it comes to getting married young. I'm saying look to the marriages that in your life that you would choose if you couldn't have your own, and then ask yourself, do I need to get advice from that person or from the person who's saying run from marriage, it's a trap? And I think the answer is clear there. And so I'm curious to see kind of what Brett Cooper says in the rest of this video, as well as if people have given her a hard time for getting married young at the age of 22. But without further ado, let's go ahead and resume where we left off.
Pushed him in that direction.
Okay, so why did you decide to get married so young?
Good
I
question.
guess it's not, by historical standards, it's not necessarily
In
that
current
young.
standards,
How old
it's
is your husband?
He is 30.
Okay. So, all right. So you married someone who was, so the optimal gap between men and women for age cross-culturally is something approximating 4 years, right? So women prefer men who are older.
Yes.
This is something to keep in mind when you're looking at, I think, when you're looking at the political opinions of men and women, young men and women. I don't think the right groups to compare are men and women of the same age. I think the right groups to compare are women who are 4 years younger than men and see where they're headed, right? Because, well, for the reasons I just laid out, the peers of young men aren't women their same age or older. Their peers are 4 years younger.
I completely.
And so my suspicions, and you're talking to, because you're on YouTube, you're talking to a lot of young men, but I think, first of all, where the men go, the women will follow. I think that's how things work fundamentally.
And I completely agree with that gap. And then I think ours made sense, being a little bigger because I, owned a home. I'm, already had graduated college. I had a successful, stable career. And so in terms of our stages of life, we were completely compatible and on the same page, as well as our values and where we were emotionally and the things that we wanted in the timeline that we want. But I chose to get married because I believe that it is the best foundation that I could have given my life. I think
Why
faith
do you
as
think
well.
that? Why not single, free, sex in the city girl? No, I'm dead serious. Why not that? I mean, you had the opportunity, right?
Yeah. It sounds just awful.
Why?
It sounds lonely because I crave companionship.
Why not one person after another then?
What's the meaning in that? It doesn't, and that's not
Diversity.
fulfilling. I have no desire for it. I wanted to get married.
Okay, so let's pause right here. I like how he pushed her on that because he was answering the questions she was asking him very well, or in the way that somebody who did not like marriage would answer those questions. And, you know, of course, when you say marriage is the way because we need companionship, well, they'll say, well, I have companionship. It's just that I have one person after another, and I just sort of sleep around and do whatever I want with any person who's in and out of my life at any moment. And that is, I guess, a shallow definition of companionship. And here's how I would answer the questions Jordan Peterson just asked. So why would you get married young? I would say, instead of what Brett Cooper said, which I think was a good answer, it's a great foundation on which to build the rest of my life. That's a good answer. But what I would say is there are several reasons. I think that's the lifestyle most conducive to a healthy sexual life. Number one, getting marriage provides lifestyle that is most conducive to a healthy sexual life, and it gives you the highest fulfillment, the highest sexual quality of life possible, I think. Number two, I don't want to be with somebody who is not going to stick around, because I want actual intimacy and not just somebody with me all the time. So I want to get to know somebody really, really well instead of get to know multiple people in the context of short-term flings. That's another reason I would like to get married young. Number two, I want to spend as much of my life as possible with the person that I love the most, instead of less of my life with the person that I love the most. And I think most people who love someone that much would answer the same. And the reason I think a lot of people don't want to get married young is because they don't have a great quality of life in their marriage, sadly, or they haven't seen those things in marriages that they've observed, and so they don't think that quality of marriage is possible in their own life, and so they give up. So those are three things I would say, just to recap. Marriage provides is the conduit through which you can live the most healthy sexual life possible. It is the only place that you can have the closest relationship to a woman possible, the most intimate relationship to a woman possible, because again, those short-term shallow companionships end very quickly, and you're just sort of skipping from one person to the next, and you're never even developing the relationship into the deep phase. You're just sort of hanging out in the kiddie pool and moving from one person to the next in that end. And so that's another reason I wouldn't do it. And number three, I want to spend as much of my life as possible with my mate and not apart from my mate. And so that's why I wouldn't get married in the future as opposed to now. Number four, marriage is the great maturer of mankind. If you want to mature, marriage is not a bad way to go. I mean, you can only mature so far, in my opinion, while you're single. I thought I was mature when I was single, and I was to a certain extent, but I could only get so mature as a single man because not enough was being demanded of me and asked of me as a single man. And so when I got married, suddenly I had my responsibilities multiplied, and more was being asked of me. And so I had to rise to meet that standard, or sink, or allow my marriage to fall into disrepair. And obviously I chose not to do that. And so, and that's still happening to me, and will happen to me again when I have children in the future. So it's funny how there's always a next phase in life where that's going to ask more of you and demand more of you and mature you more. But my point is, marriage will mature you, and that's another good reason to get married. Having short-term, shallow, casual flings will not, because again, nobody's making any demands in those relationships. Because when somebody makes a demand, people just bail. Whenever there's a demand in a short-term casual fling, people just bail. It's like, okay, hey, this is really hard for me. I would like you to do this. The other person's like, bye. I mean, that's really the extent of it. It's like, if you're going to ask me to do something that I'm uncomfortable with and I'm in a short-term relationship with you, the easier way out is to just leave. And so I'm just going to leave you where I found you and move on to the next person and have fun with them until they actually ask something of me, and then I'm just going to bail. So a person who lives that way is never going to mature. So that's several reasons that I would give Jordan for why I wanted to get married young. Brett's answer, that it was a good foundation on which to build the rest of her life, I think that's a good answer too, just because the natural, overflow of a sexual relationship that most people are engaging in their life is going to be children, and children are always healthier in the confines of a two-parent home where they have both a present mother and father. And so I'm not just making that up. That's a statistical reality. If you don't believe me, just look it up. It's universally agreed upon in almost every area that children are better off when they have a mother and father. I think it is every area. I don't think there's a single area that you could, measure like grades, probability of, avoiding jail, probability of doing great things with their life, probability of success and making money, probability of, health, long-term health or physical health, emotional health, mental health, you name it. I think children who have two present parents, both father and mother, are more likely to have those things than children who don't. And again, I'm not slamming people who are single parents. I'm just saying that's the reality of the world we live in. And so you're going to want to give your child the best shot possible. And, of course, if you're not having sex with anybody, then you're not going to have any children. Then, I would say marriage doesn't have to be the thing for you. But I don't know very many people who can live a life without some sort of sexual activity. Like I know pretty much zero. I've maybe met like one or two people in my life who can do that and flourish and like live according to God's design and not like be addicted to pornography or be hooking up or be doing all these perverted sexual things. And so most of the time what I think people do is they have this sexual drive that God's given them. Instead of using that sexual drive for the purpose that God intended it for, marriage, they go against Paul's advice to marry young instead of burning with passion into their late 30s. And they just sort of are addicted to porn for a decade. Or they're hooking up, in their teens and early 20s instead of getting married, and they're living that kind of sexual lifestyle. And then that maybe they'll repent and they'll say they'll apologize to the people that they've wronged and God, but then they'll go back to that lifestyle because again, God's designed them as a sexual being, and instead of living according to God's design as a sexual being, they'll just do these perverted and twisted things and live that way, either in a continuous cycle of repentance and then reverting back to that dysfunctional behavior, or they will just get married and then follow God's design for sexuality. That's really the only two options, because I don't see people suppressing their sexual nature very often with any degree of success. And so those are many, many reasons that I would give Jordan for getting married young and as soon as possible. So let's see what else Brett has to say on this issue, though. I'm curious to hear her flesh out this thought, because again, the thought she left us with is that being married was the best place from which to build her life. So let's see kind of what else she says.
Do you think that there are women who have a desire for that?
I'm sure.
Well, are you? I'm not so sure.
Well,
I'm not so sure.
I think that they tell themselves
yes,
they do, but I don't think that intrinsically we're not wired for that. I mean, if you go back to, I was talking about this on my show recently, we think of anthropologically, biologically, men are designed to be able to sow the seeds, to be able to go around. They can have as many children with as many women as possible. Women, it takes 9 months to grow a baby. We have one egg every month. And it's like we protect that. And I think just from that very primal point of view, we are intrinsically designed to seek out one protector that
I should offer a correction to that characterization of men. I think that's more radically true of immature men than it is radically true of immature women. And I think the reason for that is the reason you just outlined, which is because women pay a way higher price for sex, that even if they're immature, they're not going to be tilted as far in the direction of short-term mating strategy, let's say. I don't think that's intrinsic to the male nature. I really don't. I think it's intrinsic to the immature male nature. And here's part of the reason I think that. So I studied antisocial criminal behavior for a long time, like 15 years, a long time, especially in terms of its development across the lifespan. And so one of the correlates of delinquent, antisocial, and then criminal behavior for men is multiple early short-term sexual partners, right? So it's associated specifically with the criminal bent. Okay, well, but there's more to it too. So imagine that there are some men who are tilted more towards long-term relationships and stable responsibility, let's say, that goes along with that. And there are some men who are tilted more towards love them and leave them, short-term, excitement, oat sowing, hedonism. Okay. Well, we know the personality characteristics. So the personality characteristics of the men who preferentially prefer one-night stands, they're dark tetrad types. They're narcissistic. It's all about them, even though they haven't done anything to deserve it. They're psychopathic, so that makes them predatory parasites. They're Machiavellian. They use their language and their actions to manipulate for short-term benefit, and they tilt towards sadism. And so I think all things considered, as I said, immature men and immature women, they tilt towards hedonic, immediate gratification. It's a hallmark of immaturity.
Okay, there's a lot there to unpack. They've gotten off on this tangent, this side note about, whether or not men are, naturally in their nature designed to sow as many seeds as possible and have sex with as many women as they can. And he sort of launched off onto that, but I want to back up to what they said right before that about what the problem is with short-term relationships and why they're not as good, arguably, for you or the other person. If you're a man listening to the show, which odds are you are, 80% of our show listeners are young men, ages 18 to 24. And so you're probably a man listening to my voice right now, and I'm going to kind of try and convince you why short-term relationships. I probably don't need to convince you because you probably already agree with me if you're listening to a podcast about why it's a good idea to get married young. But just for the sake of, giving you an argument to use to defend the worldview and the lifestyle you've chosen, let me give you some reasons why, short-term relationships are not always a good idea. Short-term hedonistic pleasure seeking is all about you. Like Jordan Peterson said, it's very selfish. It's not about intimacy. It's just about pleasure. It's just about you having a good time. And so you don't really care about getting to know this person and bonding with them on an emotional level. You're just there to have fun. And so in that type of context, you're missing out on the entire emotional side of what sex can be. Sex can be a very emotionally bonding experience, but you're throwing that side of sexuality out the window in favor of this fraction of what sexuality is because you're just trying to have fun. You're not interested in going with this person for the long haul. You're not interested in bonding with this person on any other level than the immediate physical. And so you're basically settling for a fraction of what sexuality could be. Number two, you're risking STDs and children being created from your choices. And people will say, well, not if you use contraception. And I would say contraception doesn't always work to prevent STDs or to prevent pregnancy. And so you're taking a risk, whether you like it or not. You can't make the rules of the world. By sleeping around, you are risking STDs and having children. You can say, I can wear a condom. Condoms don't prevent gonorrhea and all this stuff. Herpes. It's not like 100% guaranteed. You can try and prevent that kind of stuff, but good luck. That's all I'm saying. Good luck. And you don't want to make the mistake of actually getting that. If you don't believe me, go watch some documentaries done by Exodus Cry and Fight the New Drug on people who actually have those diseases, and they kind of talk with you about what their lifestyle looks like and their recovery from that, and they're living with that. It's not fun, man. It's not fun. So you're risking that. And just know that. Like, there's no way around it. You can wear whatever you want. You can layer it up. I don't care. You're not guaranteeing that you're protecting yourself from those sicknesses, those illnesses. You can also have children. You can say, well, I can use contraception. She's on birth control. I'm using this. I'm doing whatever. You can't 100% prevent pregnancy if you're having sex, because sex, again, is made to, you don't have the power to prevent a pregnancy if you're having sex. You didn't make the rules of the universe here. God made the rules of the universe. God made the way the world works. You get the choice to either live in this world in a way that leads to flourishing for yourself and those around you, or you can go against the way that God designed you to live and cause harm to yourself and others. It's up to you, but you don't get to make the rules. You don't get to say, I'm not going to have children, I'm just going to sleep around. You get to choose whether or not you want to risk having a child outside of wedlock. And you'll say, well, I'm just, what's the problem with having a child outside of wedlock? Well, here's the problem with having a child outside of wedlock. Most people who do that don't stick around because raising a child is hard. And it's going to, again, it's going to mature you. It's going to forcibly mature you. And if you're the type of person who's chosen a life of ease and skipping from one thing to the next and never sticking around when it gets hard, the first reaction you're going to have when you have a child is going to be to bail. And so locking yourself in via the context of marriage is really what matures men. And if you say, well, I'm going to stick around with my wife, then I'm saying, well, you might as well get married. Why are you not getting married if you're going to stick around with your wife once you have a child? And so those are a couple of reasons that short-term relationships aren't good. Also, I'm sorry, the first sexual experience you have with somebody is usually not the best. I mean, usually you get better as time goes on. It's just like anything. The more you practice, the better you get. And that's especially true for women who, from what I've heard, have a fun time in one night stands very rarely, and usually are generally speaking not wired to benefit greatly from hookup culture in the pleasure sense. And so if you're actually looking to have a really satisfying, fulfilling sexual relationship with somebody, the best way to do that, and really I would say the only way to do that, guaranteed, is to do it over and over with them over the course of your whole life and get better at knowing them sexually. And so those are a couple of reasons. And you can't do that if you're skipping from one person to the next, because everyone's different. And you can't just pick up a basketball and be good at basketball. You know, you put in the time doing that one sport. You want to be a good podcaster? You do the sport. You do the work, you put in the time, you make a lot of podcasts. You want to be a good basketball player? You put in the time. You want to be a good football player? You put in the time. Everything's different. Every person's different. You can't just have a sexual encounter with somebody and expect it to be fireworks if you don't know that person at all. And again, you'll never know somebody if you don't stick around with them. And so those are several reasons why short-term relationships don't lead to a life of flourishing. If you're a believer, which I assume you are listening to this show, there are also several scriptural reasons. You know, Jesus says if you even look at a woman lustfully, you commit adultery in your heart. Paul says that it's a sin to fornicate very clearly. And so those are some scriptural reasons why you should not pursue short-term relationships. And so there are a lot of reasons why short-term relationships are not a good idea. I hope this episode has kind of outlined those for you guys. I hope it's given you some arguments that you can use when people act like you're a prude or you're just crazy for not wanting to sleep around outside the confines of marriage. And a lot of times people who don't want to sleep around until they get married are presented in a very negative light in society for whatever reason now. And so I just hope this episode has equipped you to answer those people who would make you seem silly for believing what you do. I hope it's enabled you to give them an answer for why you think what you think and why you've chosen to live the way that you've chosen to live. And I hope this has actually incentivized you and encouraged you to pursue long-term relationships, the opportunity where you have the most, chance of having a healthy sexual life with somebody, the opportunity where you have the most chance of getting to know somebody on an emotional level well, the opportunity where you have the most chance of creating genuine and lasting intimacy with somebody. You can't beat marriage with that. You cannot beat it. Monogamy, men will always return to monogamy, is a famous G.K. Chesterton quote, and it's true because there's no other relationship that can be closer between a man and a woman, and people yearn for closeness. And so you can't beat marriage. You cannot beat it in any way. So thank you guys so much for listening today. I hope you've enjoyed this episode. Hope it's encouraged you, again, given you arguments, reinforced your worldview, given you an answer for people who would call you a prude. I hope this has just generated a lot of value for you as a podcast listener. I'm making this podcast because I wanted it when I was 18. And so for you guys who are 18 to 22, 18 to 24, and you're looking for a podcast like this, you had a similar experience to me growing up, then this is going to generate a lot of value for you. And I'm very grateful for the opportunity to do that for you guys. Thank you for listening. If you would like, if the episode did generate value for you, reach out and let me know how through the link in the show notes. Send me a personalized audio voice message, giving me thanks, questions, comments, feedback, and alternate perspective, your story, anything at all. I would love to hear from you. It would make me feel super connected to you as an audience member, and it would make this podcasting system two-way. I would prefer to hear from you that way instead of from on social media. I love hearing from you on social media, but reach out through that link in the show notes. Just click send this podcast voice message, hit the mic button, and just talk into your phone, giving me your story, your name, saying hello, whatever you want. I would love to hear from you that way. Also, you can follow the show on Instagram and Facebook if you're interested in the content we post there as well. So thank you guys so much for listening today, and we will talk to you all next time.